All right, so I'm back again with Fernando Raul of Fernando Raul Castro Astrology, and we're continuing on with our series on the planets for each ascendant. And today we're talking about the role, in a sense, the role of Saturn for a Virgo ascendant. And our goal is not to talk about, say, Saturn in Virgo. It's simply to talk about, based on how Saturn, the house of Saturn rules from a Virgo ascendant and the exaltation, debilitation signs. If you were going to embody the highest, clearest capacity of Saturn for a Virgo ascendant, what would it look like? So thank you again for being with me today, Fernando.
Thank you, Ryan. Rock and roll.
Yep. So we've been discussing a lot of things, and I know that you've got some good notes here. When you think about Saturn for a Virgo ascendant, based on the fact that Saturn rules the 4th and the 5th house for a Virgo ascendant, Saturn is exalted in the 2nd house and debilitated in the 8th house. What kinds of insights do you have for us related to Saturn's role for a Virgo ascendant?
Well, first of all, we have to realize what Saturn is, and then we have to apply that energy to the 5th and the 6th, and then correlate it to the 2nd and the 8th, as you correctly said.
So, right, I'm sorry. It's the 5th and the 6th, not the 4th and the 5th. Yeah.
Oh, don't worry about that. No, I understood. Don't worry about that. Okay. Don't worry about that. I didn't even realize you said it wrongly. I'm sorry.
Well, I didn't either until you just pointed it out.
But yeah, whatever. But the idea is that you have to take the energy of Saturn and what is Saturn? Well, Saturn, Saturn gets a bad rap, and it shouldn't. Saturn is basically realism. It's basically discipline and responsibilities, and we apply it to the 5th and the 6th. And what is the 5th? The 5th is basically our progeny. It is our mind, and it's also our creativity and how we use that to engage life. And what's the 6th? The 6th is one of the Dushtanas. The 6th is basically obstacles, delays, and enemies. So basically, we're going to face these things with a very Saturnian outlook. We're going to face it with realism, with discipline, with work, to a certain degree with hardship. But also the idea of time and development is going to be very present in these ideas of obstacles, of deaths, of delay, of enemies, and at the same time with our progeny, our mind, and overall creativity that we might have in life. Now, the signs that Saturn represents are always developed with time. It takes time for them to develop. So, in a way, we might say that maybe Virgo Lagnas will have, it will take time for them to have children, for example. It might take time for them to fall in place with their creativity. It might take time for them to really understand how to deal with death, really understand how to deal with sickness, really understand how to deal with obstacles of all sorts, specifically coming from enemies. So what can help, the Virgo Lagna, in theory, according to the lordships, develop these areas? So as we've said, he gets exalted Saturn gets exalted in the 2nd house, in Libra. So basically, we're going to have help from our finances, from our responsibilities, from our family, to really work with our obstacles, with our debts, with our enemies. Maybe we have a debt, and maybe we can get help from our family and get some money to deal with that. Maybe we have a situation with children, with our creativity. Maybe our finances, we can pay a nanny, or we can leave the children with the grandparents in order to help us develop those areas. But at the same time, Saturn gets debilitated, obviously, in Aries, in the 8th. So what is the 8th? The 8th is basically sudden ups and downs, others' finances, and the hidden. So basically, we have here a very clear dichotomy that's very interesting. Even though other people's, our family's finances and our finances can help us develop that, at the same time, other people's money can come into a difficult situation with these areas. So we have to have a balance there. Right. But what this really means, it's that we take our patience, we take our time to develop our creativity, our mind, to deal with debts. And if something happens out of the blue, a sudden up and down, a sudden break, then, oh my God, what happened here? Right. I gotta keep my balance. That's something that's really going to be present in the Virgo Lagna's life. the Virgo Lagna will want to deal with these things calmly, with time, with discipline, and if something comes up, like for example a sudden disaster, natural disaster.
Like if your house falls into the river.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, like someone we know had that happen to them, and
And it's okay to laugh at them because they're on this channel right now. So anyway, go ahead.
yeah, so those things can come up and affect our mind, affect the way we think. So this is more or less an idea of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and thinking about Saturn with its exaltation and debilitation, exalted in the second house. And again, we think of Virgo as being a hard worker, and we think of Virgo as being very endurant and the kind of person you want to have to get things done. And oftentimes we think about it as though it's just because it's Virgo, but it's not. It's because naturally Saturn is exalted in the second house of responsibility and work, and it's also the sign of Libra, which is to other people, and so that's why Virgos have that capacity. So one of the ways to work with Saturn in a healthy way is to think about, all right, well, if Saturn were naturally exalted, then I would naturally be responsible. I would naturally be patient and endurant and get things done that needed to be done, even if I didn't like it. Versus when we think of Saturn being debilitated in the 8th house, you see, if you've got a good foundation, if you're good with your responsibilities and you've taken care of the foundation of everything, when a sudden break or change occurs, it's going to hurt still, but it's not necessarily going to demolish your entire life. So that's why working with Saturn is so important for Virgo, because if you haven't created the great foundation of finding a way to take care of yourself, to meet your own responsibilities, to have good, fair exchange with the people around you, then when a disaster like an 8th house thing does occur, of course you're going to crumble. And you mentioned the rulership of the 5th and 6th house and having delays to children. Well, it could be a few things. Virgos could just naturally have a delay towards children because of the 6th Lord ownership with the 5th Lord ownership, or it could be that it takes them a while to actually get comfortable with the idea of being a parent or being responsible for a child. True. Because you have to grow into Saturn. And it's usually after your Saturn return or 36 when Saturn matures where a person's able to say, oh, okay, now I'm ready because I understand how Saturn works, such that I can really deal with the 5th and 6th house rulership of Saturn for Virgo ascendant. I think it's important for Virgos to remember, or any ascendant to remember, that each planet has a particular capacity to kind of color the potential life experience or the potential ups and downs a person has. And if you can work with it consciously, even if it's different than a Leo ascendant or if it's different than an Aries ascendant, you are playing your role, which is part of the reason we're having this kind of conversation, to give people an insight of what those roles are based on how the planets function for the ascendant.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And that's why, the lordships are so important. That's why you have to have your clear significations of the houses to really understand the nuance of each lagna.
Right.
And at the same time, as you said, Virgo lagnas are people who like to work, who are meticulous, who are detailed in how they live. And that's also going to be applied to the 5th specifically, because it's also an earth sign. And how we are very meticulous and hardworking with our creativity, our mind, and with children, if we have them, if we come to the realization that that's what we want to do. And with the 8th debilitation here, this idea that sudden ups and downs are bad, it really takes a big significance for a Virgo lagna. Because Saturn in Aries is a very complicated situation, and
right.
It will affect Adushtana with the significators of disease, of obstacles, and death.
Well, we are just about out of time, but one thing you just reminded me of, like for example, when it comes to health and well-being for each ascendant, we can also think about the exaltation and debilitations of planets to see what is going to give a greater sense of health and well-being. And so
definitely,
Virgo is a very important but also easy example, because if you've got Saturn exalted in the second house, which is the food you take in, we often think about Virgos as being very particular about their food. They're the ones you don't want to go out to eat with, because as soon as the waiter comes up, they're going to say, well, is that gluten-free? Was that cow raised humanely? Well, could I have, almond milk instead? Oh, is that almond milk more than 2 days old? Sorry. Like that's sort of like the classic idea of Virgo, that kind of meticulous, particular aspect when it comes to food. But the fact that Saturn is exalted in the second house tells us that one of the things that supports health and well-being for the Virgo ascendant is eating a very Spartan, clean, balanced diet. In that regard, it often relates to paying attention to, say, the Ayurvedic food combinations. So you can Google Ayurvedic food combinations, and it will tell you, don't eat melons with anything. Don't combine these kinds of food. That kind of austere approach helps to balance out the Virgo's health. Versus on the other side, when we get Saturn debilitated in the 8th house, which is longevity, when there isn't discipline, and that's a debilitated Saturn, when there isn't discipline, when there isn't that kind of focus, then the person's longevity tends to go down. So it's important to remember that these planetary combinations, or the way the planets are situated in rulership from a particular sign, just illustrates why a sign is the way it is, and gives you a blueprint about how to work with that sign well.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and conclude here with that then. And next up, we will be looking at the moon for a Virgo ascendant, yeah?
Yes, sir.
All right. It was good talking to you again. We'll be in touch soon.